faut amener les gens. Sorry? Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're gonna fill the empty seat. Okay, I got it. Okay, it's all right, huh? I'm waiting for Brad. Brad is there. He's there. So I'll wait that everybody's seated. And I think we can start. So I have some feedback, which is a bit too loud, so can you perhaps bring down the volume of the public address? I love my voice, but not too loud. Hello, everybody, and thank you to all of you for joining us today, either online or in this beautiful gilded room of the Cercle Gaulois in Brussels. We've got a full room. That's really, really great. Let me first outline what is the background to this very exceptional CERRE event. The current EU legislative process is coming to a conclusion. And it has significantly expanded the digital acquis in a number of pivotal areas, such as platforms, data, cloud, and artificial intelligence. And the drivers to the EU digital policy are twofold. On the one hand, it is about mitigating risks related to the functioning of markets, challenges to consumer rights, threats to the democratic process. And on the other hand, and perhaps to a lesser extent, the driver is to strengthen the EU technology basis. In any event, the focus today is about implementation. And the question, the challenge that regulators and policymakers are facing is very, very fundamental. And that is within an environment which is increasingly driven by economic security concerns, how can they responsibly incentivize the innovative development of foundational technologies while simultaneously ensuring the contestability and the competitiveness of digital markets? We have already addressed these topics, some of you may remember, a few months ago in our foundational technology governance summit. But I'm very pleased today to resume this conversation. And to do that, we have a fantastic group of speakers. Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President of Microsoft. And in a minute, I'm going to have a fireside chat to start the session with Brad Smith. And then we're going to be joined by Benoît Cœuré, President of the Autorité de la Concurrence in France, and Olivier Guersent, Director General of DG Comp in the Commission, and Professor Viktoria Robertson, who is the head of the head of competition and digitization at the Wirtschaftsuniversität in Vienna. So, without any further ado, I would like to invite Brad to join me.
This is the fireplace.
And Brad, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
And you may remember that we had a previous similar exercise a few years ago already, times are changing, with Vera Jourova, where we were discussing about, some of the topics which are close to this, although at the time we were not yet focusing on intelligence, on artificial intelligence. But let's talk about AI. AI has got several dimensions. One is economic competition, and we're going to be addressing this in the panel in a few minutes. A second one is related to the East-West geopolitical confrontation, but also to the North-West polarization. When I talk about the East-West geopolitical confrontation, I think we can illustrate that, for instance, by the export controls on chips, and potentially on AI models, question mark. And when we talk about the polarization between North and South, I'm thinking about something similar to what happened with the drugs, with the vaccines at the time of COVID, where essential technologies were not accessible to the global South, with the implication that it has in terms both of inequalities, but also resentment. And the political consequences could be felt, for instance, at the level of the United Nations. And the third policy dimension around AI is, of course, the ethical debates on existential risks, on political trade-offs, and I'm thinking trade-offs between order and surveillance in areas like police and justice, and on sectoral disruptions like, for instance, the impact of AI on democracy and on information flow. And I would like to focus on that. As you know, since yesterday and until Sunday, we have elections in Europe. We are going to elect a new European Parliament. And policymakers and citizens are concerned about the threats on disinformation and the role of AI in disinformation. So at the Barcelona Mobile World Congress, earlier, I think this year it was in February or March, you unveiled the Microsoft AI access principles. So could you perhaps briefly explain to us, to start, what is Microsoft doing to secure a rollout of AI in Europe, which is at the same time taking place in a responsible and fair way, and what are you doing to ensure that democratic values are being preserved in these elections that we have now and other upcoming elections in the rest of the world?
Let me try to just summarize quickly a couple of dimensions that I think go to just the critical array of issues that you've just described. Especially when you look at AI infrastructure, which is the single greatest investment by far that Microsoft is making. Think of the huge data centers with chips and the like inside them. It's clear that this can help close the North-South divide, in my view. If we can bring this infrastructure around the world, it will be very expensive, but we're seeing market forces propel about 5 companies from the US or 6, and 5 or 6 from China all focus on doing this. But it's such important infrastructure, people need to feel good about having it there. It's got to be trusted. And so what we launched in Barcelona are these AI access principles that fundamentally tries to address 3 issues: access, fairness, and responsibility. Access means other people get to use this. They have access to the chips in order to train their models. If they have models, they can deploy them, and they don't have to do anything exclusive with us. This is what Mistral AI announced it would do, and it reaches customers around the world. The second is fairness. Think about fair dealing, and I think a lot of this you can see embodied very well in the Digital Markets Act, so that you're not in a position to distort the market, to foreclose competition, to use people's data to compete with them, that you give others the access to the same programming, application programming in your interfaces you're using yourself, that people can move their data and their models if they want. And then the third is responsibility. And this is very interesting because this is where I would say economic regulation, market regulation, competition connects with these other issues. So we did focus on broad skilling of the population, sustainability, but especially responsible AI and cybersecurity. And we need to address all of these things. Now, think about the two great divides that you talked about, North and South. Why is the North-South divide so extraordinary and great? I would argue it's because 140 years ago, there was this huge capital investment in the global North for electricity, and it wasn't invested or paid for or constructed in the global South. And prosperity followed electricity. Without electricity, almost any kind of invention in our modern world became impossible. And now consider the fact that even today, there's still 700 million people in the world. Think of the population of the EU and the US together. There are still that many people that don't have electricity. Why did that not happen? Look, it's because the colonial powers of the day invested in big capital projects, but they were fundamentally typically railway tracks to extract mineral wealth, not in power plants that would enable the populations to prosper. So let's not repeat that, but at the same time, let's not replace the colonial powers of the 19th century with a bunch of tech powers of the 21st that act without constraint or accountability. But that's one piece of this, the North-South divide. Maybe we can help close it. Now the East-West divide. Things have gotten worse since the war in Ukraine. That's the reality that we probably need to do more to think about. Because especially in the cyber domain, and when it comes to cyber attacks and cybersecurity, we had big challenges before 2022, but there was a little bit of hope. President Biden met with President Putin in Geneva in August of 2021, and they negotiated some Russian restraint on, say, ransomware attacks. And then after the war started, all hope for any kind of mutually agreed self-restraint sort of went out the window. We're seeing right now this extraordinary situation in Moscow, in my opinion, where you have what is probably the single largest and most sophisticated cyber attack agency in the world, the SVR, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Agency, employed talented engineers by day. They get to benefit from this extraordinary sophistication and know-how, and then they're allowed to go home and moonlight with ransomware operations at night, and they're preying on hospitals and schools and small enterprises. It's a very difficult situation. And I think you see China becoming more sophisticated, and they are both becoming much more aggressive. So, we're suddenly in this situation when it comes to AI that we should be worrying about AI creating deep fakes. And the best thing about the European parliamentary elections, in my view, is that people worried early on. As a company, we've gotten out. We've done more than 70 training sessions in 18 countries for candidates and staff for the candidates so that people are more sophisticated, they're aware, we have detection in place. And we'll see what happens this week, but at least we've made it to Tuesday of the final week before the elections and so far avoided any mishaps. But what you really have to deal with in the world today is all of the good things that AI can bring, frankly, the regulation of the enormous capital investments that are required so people feel good about them, and also the constant fight against the use of AI as a weapon, including against our democracies.
We have in the EU, we have now the AI Act. How do your AI access principles intersect with the AI Act? Do you see is there a tension, any tension between what you are for and what the AI Act is about?
No, I don't think so. when I look at the AI Act, what I see is, first is some of you know way better than me, but it started as a focus on what we would call the applications layer, because if you look at the issues governed by the AI Act, so much of it is what I think of as the protection of consumers and the protection of citizens. Protection against bias, for example. And then it added to it in the later stages was, a safety regulation for foundation models. But it really does go more to a lot of the rights that people have in Europe as well as in other countries. And that, is reflected in our focus on cybersecurity, privacy, responsible AI. And yet it really doesn't, in my view, address the competition and market regulation issues that are also extremely important. Now, the good news is if you look at the DMA, even if that's not directly applicable, it has, I think, a lot of the principles that one can then take and apply to AI, which is what we're trying to do through our AI access principles.
Let's move perhaps now to the very important issue of AI global governance. We at CERRE, you may remember, we presented already 2 years ago to Macron, you were there, the CERRE recommendations on global governance of digital ecosystems. And clearly today we see that there are so many activities going around in so many fora. And the question that we can have is whether, given the diverse and sometimes diverging interest on the international stage, can those initiatives be successful? Can they lead? Can we have a common agreement on a number of substantive issues, or are we moving towards something which is going to be the lowest common denominator in AI, but in other foundational technologies?
I don't think we're going to move towards the lowest common denominator, because governmental efforts have moved forward at a pace that is preventing that from happening, and I think that's a good thing. When I look at sort of the global governance landscape, I actually tend to see 4 distinct different types of approaches. The first is what you might think of as national, or in the case of the EU, call it supranational regulation, laws for a defined territory. That's one. The second is sort of international coordination, which we're really seeing through the G7, through the Hiroshima process that Japan kicked off last year. We'll see more work on that next week at the G7 meeting. And that has been especially important in sort of starting to knit together AI safety standards, and you're starting to see AI safety institutes. So that is a second. The third is you're starting to see some global norms emerge out of the United Nations as people start to think about, well, what can you really do at the United Nations level, which frankly is hard. But I think if nothing else emerges, the single thing that will emerge perhaps this year is in effect a page taken out of the book of what's worked for climate change and climate science, which is to build a global consensus based on factual understanding of what's happening. And that's what the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, has done, and what I sort of would bet we'll see out of the UN, which will help. And then the fourth thing, and it relates to one of the features you mentioned, is new bilateral approaches. And this is very much a reflection of the fact that the United States government to date has controlled the export of chips, the most advanced graphical processing units, or GPUs, to keep them from going to China. And there is an active discussion now of whether there ought to be export controls applied to the most advanced AI models, or really model weights. It won't surprise me if we see that. I think that we're going to see a bilateral regime, at least out of the United States, for that purpose. And then you have to figure out how to put these 4 different planes together. And I think we'll see something emerge in the coming 3 or 4 years. And I think fundamentally what we may see is the United States government realize that it has created an early lead with China. It may not be a sustainable lead as China responds to it economically with different kinds of technology investments. And I think then you'll see at least sort of call it a North Atlantic, North Pacific, down to Australia and New Zealand and perhaps India approach, where call it the world's democracies and some other allies come together around an ecosystem that is committed to a set of, call it AI standards and the like.
I'd like, unfortunately, we have a limited time for this fire chat, and we're going to have the panel in a second. I'd like to have your views on the issues of AI partnerships. As you know, the Mistral and OpenAI partnerships are raising concerns in Europe about competition, security, and sovereignty in a critical new technology. So we're not going to talk about specific cases, neither here nor in the subsequent part of the session. But I'd really like, putting those cases aside, to hear your views about how can you allay the concerns that regulators may have concerning partnerships between AI firms and big tech?
Well, the first thing people should probably think about is that there will be no healthy market without some partnerships. It doesn't mean that all partnerships are good or that there don't need to be rules that regulate them. And by the way, this has been true forever in the world of technology. There would have been no personal computer if Microsoft hadn't partnered with Intel with a license agreement from IBM. And in my early years coming here, which was 35 years ago now, I'd go to Italy and thank goodness we got to partner with Olivetti. And I'd go to France and we'd partner with Group Bull. And you name it, I'd go to every country. And there was a hardware company that only was in business because it could use a common operating system from Microsoft. And we could only do it because there was a common chip from Intel. So, the truth is, without partnerships, the only model you can really have is a vertically integrated one. And a world where everybody has to be vertically integrated is a world where this number of companies is very small. The second thing just to think about is the fascinating aspect in part of what's happening with AI is that the organizations that are creating these models are usually very small. I mean, when we started working with OpenAI, they had 50 people. Mistral, extraordinarily impressive. You won't find a company with 40 more impressive people anywhere else. If you want to find a company with 140 people, you're going to have to go somewhere else than Mistral. This is true of all of them when DeepMind was acquired by Google. So how does a firm with 40 people change the world? First of all, isn't that an amazing question to even talk about? You have to train the model on an infrastructure that is provided by somebody else. You're going to need a partnership to do that. Now, what you have to be super careful about, I think, is avoiding exclusivity or constraints that would enable a company in, call it, one layer of the technology stack to use its market power to distort or control competition in another layer. And of course, that's been part of technology regulation here in Brussels, going back to the IBM matters of the 1980s. So it's been going on for, this is the place in the world where there's the most longstanding expertise about how to permit partnerships most of the time, but prevent them in other times or regulate them. And I think that is the thing to think about. I will just say with respect to Microsoft and OpenAI, the one thing people should remember, in my opinion, is if Microsoft and OpenAI had not partnered, there would be no market. It's not just there would be no market competition, there would be no market. It is that partnership that invented generative AI. And once people saw that you could invent it, everybody else figured out how to go do it as well. If we had this conversation 2 years ago, that phrase, generative AI, didn't even exist in a way that anybody could comprehend.
Okay, I think we'll come back to that. So thank you very much. Thank you for this the first part of the session. And I will now invite Viktoria Robertson, Olivier Guersent, and Benoît Cœuré to join us on the stage. So my first question will be for my colleague, Professor Robertson. There's an assumption that AI market will behave similarly to digital markets and then towards, therefore, monopoly or oligopoly. But at the same time, the AI market or AI markets are information. The barriers for entry are not insurmountable. We see many LLMs all over the world. We see many startups. Now, if, however, you put yourself back to the 90s, for some of you who may remember, in the 90s, when you look at search, you had also many competitors, many search engines, like there are today many LLMs, but it nevertheless tended towards monopoly. So my question, Vicky, is very simple. Are we, to what extent do you think that we are going to see the same movie?
Okay, thank you so much, Bruno. It's a pleasure being here. So I think the question you ask is a fundamental one, because obviously we have a lot of experience in scholarship and in practice with digital markets, and now we have this generative AI hype that we've been witnessing. So it's important to take a moment and start with the question you asked. Is this something new, or is it something we've seen before? Because this helps us to adequately address those questions from a legal perspective and from a policy perspective. So if we look at the AI landscape, obviously, like you said, there's much more than generative AI. So there's lots of AI tools. And at their core, they overlap considerably with what we've been discussing as digital platform markets over the past decade or so. There's some real capabilities involved, computing power, data, know-how. And we also see that AI-powered applications can be integrated and are being integrated into digital services, enhancing their functionality. So there are important overlaps, and so from a computational perspective, there's good reason to say that AI is a further development in the digital space, and it requires a similar approach. So this means that much of the experience that competition authorities and also scholarship have accumulated in relation to digital markets can directly apply to AI markets as well. Now, a central concern, and something that I would hope we've learned from dealing with digital platforms, is that these characteristics of digital markets can lead to this solidified market concentration because of the dynamics like network effects and tipping and lock-in, and also the importance of access to the right kind of data. So this is not new, just like AI as such actually is nothing new. But digital technologies are evolving, and in competition law and policy, we need to evolve with them. So what does that mean for us today? I think it means let's not make the same mistakes that we have been made in digital platforms before this hype about AI. And what were those? If you analyze the past 10 or 15 years, we see that competition policy has allowed for a lot of consolidation to happen in digital markets. We have digital gatekeepers that have emerged, a new kind of market power that we can witness, and also the abuse of this kind of market power. And this was not always possible to tackle with traditional antitrust tools, or at least not in a timely fashion, leading to the necessity of the Digital Markets Act in the EU, the Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Act in the UK now, and also Section 19 of the German Competition Act. So I think in AI-related markets, we should be prudent from the start, and I think that we've accumulated a lot of experience already that can help us do that.
Thank you, Benoît Cœuré. You have, in the last months, spoken quite a lot about the competition aspects of AI and cloud. Do you anticipate competitive developments in AI or cloud being similar to what we saw in search?
So, I mean, first, thank you for having me here. I think it's an incredibly important discussion to be had, and it's time. It's not too late to have that discussion. So, thank you for having it. I think it's in a way it's very good that Brad and you started with discussing the broader significance of AI for our societies. I mean, politically, in terms of the fairness of the political process, also in terms of, how is AI going to impact key services such as education, health services, etc. Because if you think of everything that AI can bring to our societies, I mean, first, I think we have a duty to be positive about it, given the potential, given the upside that we have. There is downside. And our job is to care about the downside as enforcers, but let's not lose sight of the upside. And we need to have the right mix of safeguards, and also we need a market structure that will provide for dynamism and open access. And the sequence we've just had in Europe is we started with the safeguards in terms of the AI Act provides risk management, control, etc. And that's the way we like to do it in Europe, focusing first on the risks. We've ticked that box, and I think now time has come to focus on what can we do as a group, not only on the enforcer side, but also in the industry, to provide for the right kind of dynamism that will allow for open access. We want to see a world where where users can avail of a variety of models, of AI models, not only in terms of training models, but also in terms of use cases, the kind of data that will be used, and etc. And of course, that's about competition comes in, because there we can play a useful role to allow for this kind of open access to AI that we want to see. And it has to be a mix of competition and regulation. There are things we can do on the antitrust side. We've already started to identify possible bottlenecks and possible issues, competitive issues, particularly upstream. And I think all competition authorities are kind of working on the same issues: access to data, access to compute, access to cloud services, very importantly, and access to talents and human resources. And there is a fair level of commonality across the, say, the G7 and even more broadly to discussing all these issues. That can create bottlenecks in the short term. I mean, you can see, obviously, the price of GPUs and stuff like that. That's evidence of possible bottlenecks. But that can also, down the road, create risks of exploitative conduct and exclusionary conduct, which is the core of our business as enforcers. And this we want to avoid. So we'll focus very much on that kind of risks. But we also have to acknowledge that part of the answer does not lie in antitrust. It can lie in regulation. So the AI Act is important. The Data Act can help quite a bit. There are issues where probably we need to invest a little bit more, to think a little bit deeper, such as copyright, where we obviously need to. There is a kind of a trade-off between
We talk about the tools in a second.
Yeah. So I leave copyright for later, but I think that's an area where we need to. We haven't found the right model yet, and we need to find the right model. Open source is also a dimension where we need to find a common ground. There are different definitions of open source, different claims about being open, and we need a little bit of a level playing field here so that users can navigate through these concepts. And then we'll do what we have to do as enforcers. But I think the bottom line here is, let's not lose sight of the broader purpose that we're all serving, which is making AI accessible throughout the society in a way that is open with a variety of models. And also there is a little bit of a tree that hides the forest thing here. We're all focusing on competition for AI. That is what's happening in the AI market, particularly in the upstream AI market. Let's not lose sight of competition with AI. So how is AI going to change the market structures in lots of other industries, particularly service industries?
Okay.
So let's keep a little bit of bandwidth to think about these broader issues.
Thank you. Olivier Guersent, how do you intend to achieve a level playing field in AI, considering that we're likely to have competition just with a limited number of firms?
Well, I think what Brad said was, he's absolutely right. You need partnerships. We are in a world in which innovation is more and more important. It's quicker and quicker. And it's, of course, magnified in the tech industry. And more disruptive innovation are brought about by very small firms, more than the big ones. But you need the big one. You need to roll over the innovation because you cannot do that with 50 people or 150 people. You need the networks. You need the channels. You need all of this. Think about the vaccines. The COVID vaccines were not invented by the big pharma. They were invented by very small firms. But you needed the big pharma and the production capacities to roll these vaccines massively throughout the world. So the whole thing is that it happens in a way that ensures a level playing field, fair competition, as Benoît just said, no exploitative or exclusionary abuse. So you need to keep it open, etc. But that's the whole thing. The second consideration is that, we have the benefit in the Commission to probably have the longest in story in terms of intervening in the tech business through antitrust tools and mergers. And the lesson we draw is that there is a cost in intervening too late, and there is a cost in intervening too early. And for the time being, it's very early in the AI. You said markets. I don't know exactly what would be an AI market. So in AI, say. Because we are at the stage in which, is the early stages of a new universe. You have gas clouds that will certainly at some point become galaxies, but we're not yet there. So I agree with what Benoît says. For the time being, what you want to ensure is that the main inputs are available, that they are not captured by a few firms. So we're talking access to cloud, access to large amount of data, access to chips, access to brains, etc., etc. So you want to keep this universe as open as possible so that it is vibrant and you have a lot of competition and until you know who are the winners. The second thing you need to look is downstream, because downstream AI impacts a number of activities in tech or outside of tech, in which you have people with considerable market power, and you do not want either that they capture these innovations in order to magnify the market power. So I think at this stage, it's hard to say more than that. And of course, your initial question was, if I may sum it up, are we in front of tipping markets? And the fair answer is, we don't know. There are some characteristics that make us think they could be tipping, aggregation of large amount of data, for example. At some point, it tips and the winner takes it all. Some other models that are not completely stupid tells you that maybe not, and the jury is still out. But what we know is that if it is tipping, we will need to be quick, because once it has tipped, then you're too late and you're kind of lagging behind.
Okay. Brad, you wanted to come?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things, and I broadly agree. The first thing I would say is I think it's really important to focus on bottlenecks. That is the problem that needs to be addressed and ideally avoided. Because the best way to tip a market is to create a bottleneck. And if you can create a bottleneck, whether it's upstream or downstream, you start to distort the market. And then the next thing to think about, I think, that is just so fascinating to me about coming to Brussels in 2024, is that fundamentally there's two kinds of tools that regulators can use: cases and rules. And for decades, really, it was just cases. And I don't like cases. I don't like cases as a plaintiff because they take so long. I mean, look, we've been vocal about the bottleneck that we believe was created when Google entered into an exclusive agreement with Apple for the default setting on the iPhone. And Google quite readily repeats that they just succeed on quality, not on the bottleneck, but they spend $20 billion a year for that one contract for what sure as heck feels like a bottleneck for the only other company that is operating internationally in more than one country, really, in the search market. So as a plaintiff, cases are too slow. And I've spent many times coming to Brussels as a defendant in cases. By the way, they're slow too, and they're just uncertain. And so to me, the greatest single advance for the world of technology and competition is actually the approach to market regulation brought about by the DMA. Because you have rules. And actually, there's 18 different services. And what the European Commission, the European Union were able to do with the Digital Markets Act is basically win 18 cases all at once by creating rules that everybody has to follow. The other thing I like about the rules is that then you get more clarity and they apply to everybody. At least they should. And you look at it and you say, okay, well, I may not have one of the 18 services that are under it today, but I know that if I'm successful, then I'm going to be in, and I know exactly what it's going to mean because there's a lot of transparency about how the rules are being applied to everybody else. And so, you can ask, well, could you graft AI or the various areas of AI onto the Digital Markets Act? And the answer might be literally yes or literally no, depending on the way the DMA was written in terms of precise scope. But mostly I would say it points the way, in my opinion. And, frankly, that's what we tried to do with our access principles. We tried to anticipate, okay, where should the rules go? Because in my view, we don't need to win versus somebody else. We just need to be able to participate with clarity, certainty, and commonality in terms of rules that will be applied to everybody. And the thing that is actually different about the future technology markets from the whole history of digital technology and the European Commission's fundamentally 50 years of addressing it is what was mostly a people-intensive, call it operating expense-intensive industry, is now a capital-intensive industry. And so I had this conversation in one of the member states with an official who said, hey, we feel good about you at Microsoft. We feel good about you going ahead with this multi-billion-dollar investment in our country, but we don't want to depend on you. And I said, I get it, but just remember, we depend on you too. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, we're going to spend $3 billion to build these data centers, and none of them are going to be put on wheels. So once they're done, they're sitting in your country. So we have to know that how it's going to work well enough to feel good. And by the way, after we spend the first $3 billion, we're probably going to have to spend another $3 billion, given the nature of this. So a strong, assertive, proactive, fast-moving regulatory regime actually makes a huge amount of sense if you can have rules that are clear and apply to everyone.
Brad just talked about the DMA. You talked about the DMA and AI. I mean, it leads me to ask about the tools that you gentlemen can use in your in addressing AI issues. I mean, what kind of tools are going to be dealing with AI? Are we talking about competition law? Are we talking about regulation, for instance, the regulatory provisions of the AI Act or GDPR? Or do we need to address, because this is something new, we're going to need new tools? Is the DMA going to be applicable to AI services? Are we going to have a new core service which is going to be added to the list? Can one of the regulators react on that?
You should start, Olivier, because
Okay, I can give it a go.
DMA is you, it's not me.
Yeah, DMA is me. Well, first of all, I think it's important to distinguish the DMA, which is a competition-inspired regulation, and is asymmetric from symmetric regulations like the AI Act, the Data Act, and all of this. I mean, because these regulations are the regulations you find in every market that are governed by economies of scale and scopes. I mean, think about, railways, telecoms. It's a bit of the same. And you need to protect your consumers. Some of these are pro-competitive. Some of these are simply geared on protecting consumers and citizens at large. And this is what they are. And for us, they're facts. So it's part of the landscape you have to take into account in a competition analysis. The DMA is of a completely different nature, as Brad said. I mean, the DMA, you're absolutely right. I mean, is based on the sad fact that antitrust is quite powerful, but is slow. And it's slow for many reasons, and it's not going to be any faster in a world in which you have increasing amount of data to crunch in order to make your case. So as we were seeing a pattern of repeated infringements, it's not exactly the same, but I mean, firms could not know that they were infringing. They could not know that we will in the end nail them, and that probably we will be followed by the courts. And still they were doing it again and again. So at some point we thought, okay, well, outright prohibition. So we need to set ex ante rules. This is what the DMA is. And it's only for the big guys, because we want that the smaller guys are free of doing whatever they can, provided they respect competition law. So coming to AI, the DMA is about platforms. What is the platform that you would designate in AI at this stage? You don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't see any, let's put it that way. So for the time being, the way AI impacts the DMA is because AI impacts a number of core services that are designated, like search, for example, in the DMA. And of course, we are analyzing these services and the behavior of the gatekeepers on these services. We take into account the impact that the irruption of AI into these services is causing, and that's part of the analysis. And if need be, part of the harm we would find, and part of the remedies we would ask the companies to provide. But that's pretty much the way it works. For what Benoît called the bottlenecks, for example, cloud, well, then it's a bit easier, because there may be a point at which cloud will be designated, and we will designate gatekeepers in cloud. We're not yet there, but likely it will come at some point. Mm-hmm. And of course, that will also have a bearing on the way AI develops and how open it will be. So my take is that for at least the foreseeable future, which may be short, I don't see how AI can, or any AI platform, could be meaningfully designated.
Can I put a very concrete question? Suppose I'm a provider, okay, and I'm offering AI in my services. do I need, because of the rules on self-preferencing, offer various AI options?
Well, depends how long you have, yeah, for this question. Who are you as a provider? Are you a gatekeeper? Do you have an exclusive agreement with this AI provider? But there's many things. In principle, I mean, of course, I mean, Brad said it. I mean, what you would expect for any firm, large or small, active in that field, is to be interested in AI, invested in AI. I mean, having partnership with AI firms, because this is a train you don't want to miss. And that's normal, and that's competition. Our role is to make sure that those of these firms that have market power do not use that market power in order to try to play unfair and prevent others to get access to these resources or any other way of making it happen. And that goes with the DMA, that goes with antitrust, and that goes with mergers. You said it, we will not talking about anything that is ongoing, but for example, we have case law that acquisition of assets can be a merger. If the assets are brains, I think acquisition of brains could be a merger as well. There's nothing that would prevent that. And in that case, we could use merger control. Doesn't mean we would have a problem. That means that's probably something we would like to check if the acquirer has market power.
I'd like to follow up on that and on the issue of partnerships, because Brad has explained his views about these partnerships and the fact that basically there's nothing new under the sun in what you're explaining. But I'm using the word partnerships because obviously we're not talking about mergers, or the firms do not merge or do not acquire each other. They go into, they're doing corporate arrangements, which, at least according to the CMA, recently is not considered as being a merger. But what is your view about that? And perhaps I would ask first Vicky, given the early stage of evolution and the lack of knowledge on optimal market configuration, is there even a problem with these partnerships? Do you, from an academic perspective, do you see a problem with these partnerships?
Well, that's a good question. So obviously, we see partnerships happening, and some of those we will need, and all of them we will need to assess and just see, well, does merger control apply? Is there something like negative control, which could be enough to step in under merger control? Or like the CMA looks at material influence. But if this is not the case, then the question, of course, turns to, is that possibly an anti-competitive agreement? Mm-hmm. And in what way could it be such? And no matter whether you look at it through merger control or through antitrust, then of course the question is, what could be the issues here in substance, like you said? Like what could be the problem? So in what ways could such partnerships benefit or also harm competition and innovation? And here I mean innovation of the kind we want to see, right? So innovation that enables users and doesn't lock them into a service, for instance. And a while ago I did a study for DG Comp on digital mergers, and what I found is that there's a certain disconnect between theories of harm in merger control and theories of harm under 102. And perhaps we can extend that and say maybe there's also that under 101. So if we have a closer connection when looking at theories of harm, then perhaps we can imagine where there could be such harm in such partnerships. But for that, of course, we need to understand the precise terms of the partnerships and what benefits there are for consumers through those partnerships, but also what the anti-competitive harm could be in the long term, leveraging foreclosure, also strengthening a digital ecosystem, or the US merger guidelines call it entrenchment, and there's actually a lot of scholarship underway to shed more light on these issues.
Thank you. Benoît, your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can just follow up on what Vicky just said, that it's, you know, the question is, it's really about the theory of harm. I mean, partnerships and even mergers are a means to an end. So it depends on what you want to achieve on both sides. As Brad just said, I mean, partnerships are just, you know, a normal way to build a business. I'm not particularly concerned with Mistral's partnerships, for instance. I mean, as long as they are kind of open and and don't create privileged relationships with any of the big players. That's just a normal way for them to build capacity and to be distributed. So, but that could change. But so if this is a way to strengthen an ecosystem, a universe which is diverse, I think that's okay. If it is a way to reinforce the dominance of big players, it's not okay. The fact is that we have plenty of legal avenues to deal with that kind of partnerships. We have regular merger control. We have Article 22 of the merger regulation, as you know, depending on what the European Court of Justice will have to say about it. And if the European Court of Justice is not happy with it, we'll have to find something else, because we need that kind of instrument. So if that instrument is not there, we need to find something else to deal with smaller acquisitions. That's for acquisitions. We have Article 102 in specific cases, obviously. The acquirer has to be a dominant firm. You need strengthening of dominance, so it's not going to be the general case, but in some cases that could be relevant. We have Article 101. We just took a decision at the French Competition Authority reviewing a merger under Article 101, reviving the Philip Morris, the old Philip Morris case law, if you want to put it that way. So it's possible. The question, and I think there is some flexibility, some elasticity in merger review. As Olivier rightly said, acquiring an asset can be a merger. In French law, we have this notion of determining influence déterminante, right? So there are, subtle variations around Europe, depending on the language and the country, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a majority stake and so on. So we can, I feel pretty comfortable having a toolbox which I can use as an enforcer to deal with different cases. The question is, how do we give guidance to the industry? Because if there are so many possible instruments, the industry can be lost, and that can create legal uncertainty. So we'll have also, it's not only about the legal framework. I think the legal framework is fine as it is, broadly speaking, but we also need to clarify our doctrine and give guidance to the industry, which we haven't done yet.
Thank you, Olivier.
Well, I have not much to add. Everything Vicky said is true. The Americans have indeed, I think it's guideline 12 in their new merger guideline about entrenchment. We have had a first entrenchment case in Booking eTravel. So it is true that acquiring decisive influence over a product that is not necessarily vertically or horizontally related to yours can, under certain circumstances, raise barriers to entry onto your core market, the one you derive your main power from. That I think we're well equipped to deal with. Not everything is a merger, indeed, but you have different intensities in partnerships and in closeness of relationship. And do you have exclusivity agreements that go along with this or not? I remember of a very old case law in the 90s, Coca-Cola Inc. and the Coca-Cola Company. One was not legally controlling the other. There's nothing such as 51% of the share of one into the other. But so we had to dig hard to show that through a string of links, actually one was controlling the other. And if you can demonstrate it, well, fine, it's a merger. If you cannot, then it's Philip Morris. So that means one company has acquired a degree of influence that is considerable into the other, but doesn't amount to a merger, mainly because you cannot show that there is a lasting change in control. That doesn't create competition concerns, and then you have to deal with them under the Philip Morris doctrine. So indeed, I think we can cover pretty much the whole universe of possible practices and partnerships.
Thank you. I'd like for the last part of this fascinating discussion, perhaps to take a step back. and come back to what I said earlier about when I introduced Brad, I mentioned one of the two drivers of the EU digital policy is to strengthen the EU technology base, and perhaps we could address that in the last part of our conversation. If I wanted to simplify things, I would say that from a digital policy perspective, the EU has three key features. A very large market, limited digital technology, and values. And we've managed to leverage our market power to impose values on technologies that we neither own nor control. And it worked well for privacy. And this led to the so-called Brussels effect. But do we have clear indications that it's going to be the same? The Brussels effect is going to reproduce across different foundational technologies. I just learned recently, I read, I think a few days ago, the EU Court of Auditors, which issued a report criticizing the Commission and the AI strategy of the Commission in particular. And we have so far fallen behind in developing some core AI capabilities, and I just mentioned three of them. First, Draghi noted recently that the EU has a public network of high-performance computers, which is world-class, but he said spillovers to the private sector are currently very, very limited. Second, we mentioned the skills. We have great difficulty to retain the skills, the skilled people that we need for AI and for our foundational technologies. And third, our power grids are not up to level to meet the huge energy amounts which are required by AI. So clearly, we urgently need a significant policy push to catch up in AI and its ecosystem. So my question to the panel is really, do you, ladies and gentlemen, think that we have in Europe the right balance between regulation and innovation? Do you think that, do you agree that the implementation of the AI Act, which is going to be really fundamental, but it should not only ensure legal security and predictability, but also, first and foremost, to foster investment? So since I mentioned the word commission, I will give the floor to my friend, the Director General of Competition.
Well, I mean, it's years that I hear that. I think most of the regulations in Europe, frankly, are pro-competition and pro-innovation. And having rules has never preempted anybody from innovating. I mean, it's when protecting privacy, for example, I don't see exactly how it prevents you from innovating. So I don't think that's really the problem. We're lagging behind for many other reasons. We are not training enough engineers. We have a non-functioning capital market. Benoît is more competent than me for that, for historical reasons. But so when we have innovators in Europe and they need to scale up massively, frankly, the best way is to go to the US, because then you have the type of large and deep capital market and people with a risk appetite that is difficult to find here in Europe. So there is a lot to do. I don't think we should emulate the US capital market, because there are many reasons why it is what it is and we are lagging behind. And the main one, in my view, is in the way how they finance and how we finance a social model. And as I don't think European citizens would like to have an American-like social model, by definition, we will not get there. But you have a huge margin to improve the functioning of capital markets in Europe, and that, I think, will do a lot more to promote innovation in Europe than potentially over-regulation is making problem too. So I think really, and it's far beyond competition, The key parameters of competitiveness here are in basically framework policies in which we don't have it right because we're complicated, because we have to put together and get to agree 27 member states. I mean, my previous job, already working with Benoît, I launched the Capital Market Union. And everybody knows why it failed. The first thing is, if you want to invest cross-border in Europe, you want to know what happens if it doesn't work. Well, for the time being, you have 27 regimes. So the costs are enormous. What do? You invest home because you know the rules. We propose to say, okay, well, let's make it one regime. We had 27 ministries of justice against, because they're all in favor of harmonizing if we take their model. And so on and so forth. So that brings us far, but skill and reskilling. We're lacking 1 million engineers in Europe. And the brains are really the power engine. I mean, Brad is right. It became a capital-intensive industry. We don't have the capital. And it's still a brain-intensive industry, and we don't have enough brains. Not well-trained, anyway. So I think if we would start by fixing this, we would go a long way to finally having European GAFAs that could feel the heat of European antitrust control as well.
Thank you, Benoît.
Yeah, three.
I saw you nodding when I was talking.
Yeah, I was nodding because I think that's one of the main challenges and stakes when we think about Europe's industrial policy, and I very much hope that Mario Draghi's report will have a section also on AI and how do we prepare for that. But just to keep it simple, let me just outline 3 thoughts. First, and that applies to the whole discussion we're having tonight. I think we need a fair amount of technological humility. As Brad rightly reminded us, I mean, 1 year ago, none of us knew what an LLM was. Well, maybe 2 years ago. Maybe 1 year ago we knew, but not 2 years ago. And maybe 2 years down the road, it's not about LLMs anymore. I mean, so you know, the whole discussion about how much data, how much compute, how much cloud services, etc. we need to pre-train and then to fine-tune and then to ground or RAG, whatever technology you use to LLMs. I mean, that technology will change. Hopefully it will change because we'll reach the limits of the current technological approach. So and let me be a little bit provocative here. Maybe also in terms of the use cases of AI, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, we found out that AI is so important to our societies that we want some of these infrastructures to be public. I don't know. I don't know what the political discussion will be. I'm kind of that's kind of above my pay grade, but that some of the rails of the technological rails that we need to build an AI system might have to be public. I just don't know. So let's also be kind of humble here. Second, obviously, Europe needs to build capacity in providing all essential inputs that we've discussed tonight. So that's compute, that's data, that's skills, etc. There are practical ways to do it. And by the way, we are going to release on the 28th of June our market study on AI. So there will be very practical ideas and recommendations. I'm teasing for it a little bit. That's on the 28th of June, along those lines. But then one final remark is that if European policymakers believe that Europe can be alone in doing that, they are wrong. As we can see, we need partnerships between European and US firms. We might need partnerships between European and Asian firms. And so we need to keep a very strong coordination framework around these issues. I would say, first of all, at G7 level, but more broadly at OECD level as well. And political and geopolitical fragmentation is a bigger threat to the deployment of AI.
Okay, well, you will have the last word, Brad. What are your takeaways from this discussion and from the many conversations I understand you've been having in the last months in Europe, but also beyond?
What I would conclude with is this. I think that Europe and the European Union has developed the tools needed to regulate AI, especially given the leap forward with things like the Digital Markets Act. And I would, may seem odd, but I'd be an advocate for using those tools sooner rather than later so that you can attract investment and with confidence that you'll have a healthy competitive market. I think the bigger question for Europe to think about is how to put AI to use to serve Europe itself. And what I have found over the years, whether inside Microsoft or in the tech sector or more broadly, is it's sort of human nature that you envy what you lack and you take for granted what you have. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing that I think Europe should do is take stock of what it has and make sure it uses AI to keep it strong. So what is the fundamental strength of the European economy? It's actually a whole series of businesses, large, middle, and small, with great domain expertise. The world's best chemical companies, pharmaceutical companies, a lot of manufacturing companies, medical devices companies, automobile companies, aircraft companies, railroad engine manufacturing companies. You go on and on and on. And what is so amazing to me is two things. One, in Europe, unlike the United States, you are likely to find a company that is great in 2024 that was also great in 1974 and was great in 1924. And the truth is, it is because there is more a tradition here of mastering something and continuing to focus on mastering it into the future, whereas the US is probably more inclined to say, wow, if we did one thing well, we can do everything well, and then you actually realize you can't. So, but then the thing to keep in mind is that AI is going to reshape every one of those industries and every one of those companies. So make sure that Europe uses AI to remain strong where it is strong already. From that perspective, to me, one of the more inspiring stories I've encountered is what I see at Mercedes-Benz. They are using AI and they're going to put it in the car in ways that everybody will talk about, but they're using AI to redefine how they paint the car and how they maintain a car and how they provide customer service for people who own cars or lease them. And that's what you should want. Get it to work. Then you go to the second thing because it's closely related to the first. A lot of the technologies that people are going to use across Europe are the applications layer. It's the startups. And the startup scene is so much healthier in Europe today than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Not in every country, but wow, you do encounter startups in lots of different places. One of the things that, frankly, I was just so pleased about was when we announced our investment in France with President Macron, we had a piece of it, to provide support for 2,500 startups in France. Look, 20 years ago, we couldn't have found 2,500 startups in France in that field. So that is great cause for optimism. Then you do get to some of the barriers that you heard before. You can raise enough capital from a healthier venture capital market to get started, but a lot of times then you can't raise the money to scale. And so I do think that there's going to be an ongoing need to build out really the financial services sector to serve this startup economy well. That's what's going to keep the people who are trained here so that they stay here. And then, by the way, you don't need to confine yourself to the people that you train here. You can attract people from other places. The US is still an attractive place for engineers to move to, but it's not as attractive as it was 10 or 20 years ago. for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is just the degree of political polarization that leave immigrants feeling more nervous than they used to. It's really hard to go anywhere in the world where you find people who will say that there's a better place to go than Europe for vacation. No, but then you look at Lisbon, and they've turned it from a vacation destination to a place where people want to live. So you become a magnet for talent, and especially in a world where population is leveled off or even declining. Everybody is in this new form of competition. It's called competition to attract talent from other places. And so then you have to really think about, how you do that. And then I just think at the end of the day, you just have to be careful that you not over-regulate. And I'm not talking about the antitrust or competition space. It's just all of the regulations that exist here. And, I am struck. I'll go to Berlin. We meet with the startups, and a CEO will stand up and say, do you think I can afford to keep my business here and succeed, or do I need to move it? And really what she meant was, do I need to move it to the United States? You have to keep them here. And, I just think that if there's a bit of a trade-off, regulate a little bit less, but attract more talent, inject more investment, encourage more innovation so that more of what you regulate is European. I think that's a bargain that I hear today. I'm never going to be the one who says, I'm here to tell you what to do, because I don't live here, certainly not anymore. But I have been struck. Almost every head of government that I meet with in Europe today says privately what President Macron is now saying very publicly, which you didn't used to hear from Paris. Hey, we want to have more innovation and investment and a little bit less regulation. It's a really good recipe, I think. And you should all feel very optimistic about what Europe can achieve if it puts that, I think, into effect.
I think it's on this optimistic message that we're gonna make a close here. I feel a bit, I feel a bit disappointed as a moderator, because I was expecting that, there will be fighting, there will be a lot of divergences, very acute expressed here, and I didn't hear that. So I think it's interesting to see that we can have a conversation and move towards similar objectives, because clearly, as you said, as Olivier, Benoît said, clearly the objectives are the same. I'm not saying this is the final word, because these are issues that we are going to continue to talk about. So I'd like to thank very much Professor Viktoria Robertson. I would like to thank Olivier Guersent, Benoît Cœuré, and Brad Smith. I would like also to thank you all and to thank the people who are watching us online. I understand that there are quite a number of them. You will see that this program is going to be posted again on our CEST YouTube channel, as well as on LinkedIn. I also want to thank my fantastic team, the academic and the secretariat team, who have not spared their efforts to make this event a success, despite the limited amount of time that we had for that. Let me just say thank you to Anna Maria, of course, Richard, Daniel, Adrien, Gautam, Marina, Zoe, Amaya, Victoria, Olivier, and sorry if I forgot some names. I also want to thank you to Microsoft and to the Brussels team of Microsoft for their really valuable support. I'm pleased to invite you, all of you now who are in this room, to a cocktail reception which is going to take place in the back of this room. Sorry guys, for you who are online, there won't be any cocktail reception, but I hope that you're going to join us again soon. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
she hitting.